am Liz Loza, and this is Facts versus Feelings, your amuse-bouche to your fantasy focus main course. So we are bringing more fantasy, more facts, more feelings, and of course, more fun. And now that I have your attention, today's fact is that sometimes you just gotta shake things up. Producer Presley is here because what is Facts versus Feelings without a backwards baseball cap and a vaguely British accent?
Well, that's all I can offer to this show, Liz, is a backwards baseball cap and a confusing accent. No, it feels good to be back. Week 6. We are a third of the way through the fantasy season. Maybe just over a third, as long as you're not a fool that plays your fantasy playoffs in week 18. But I'm happy to be here.
This is the part of the season where we need to start shaking things up. But before we move ahead, I have to ask you if you saw the handshake between Jaden Daniels and Juju Watkins. It shook the internet over the weekend.
I know. It actually made me a little bit jealous. I think I wish we had a secret handshake, Liz. We're going to be together in Austin next week, so I think we have to come up with one. We'll make one up.
I am looking forward to that, especially after Jaden Daniels, who I just mentioned, eats against my Bears. He's my QB1 heading into week 6. So, now thank you for giving me something to think about.
Well, you know what other people should thinking about? Liking and smashing that video, subscribe button,
so good at
like
this.
the video, NFL on ESPN YouTube channel. And we have a voicemail line. Liz, do you remember it?
The number?
Yes.
Oh, sure. Hold on. It's 914-348-1893. I don't know why I cannot commit this to memory, but I do know
6 weeks.
that
6 weeks in.
More than that. We had the summer too, friend.
Sure.
But I do know that as it pertains to the voicemail, while I cannot always remember the digits, I do remember that the producers, yourself and Alex and Adrian, check the voicemail line on Mondays. So maybe while our viewers are watching the games on Sunday and they're seeing the facts of their matchups and feeling the feels of those results unfold, they might want to call the voicemail line. Again, that number is 914-348-1893 and leave us a little message.
I love that. Love it.
Do you love it as much as our disclaimer, which I think you should roll right now?
I'll hit it right now. Fantasy football is a game of inches, luck, and irrational confidence. Proceed with caution, trust your gut, and remember, side effects of listening to this podcast may include spontaneous victory dances, mild trash talking, and a belief that your sleeper pick is better than everyone else's. Take the facts of fantasy football seriously, but consult your feelings before making any lineup changes.
Shake and then bake. Shake and bake.
Well, Liz, I did my homework this week, and I read your Facts versus Feeling column, as I always do every week. Everyone should read it. It's live on .com right now. And you said QB streaming is alive and well in 2025. And that is why we are going to talk about Matthew Stafford right now, who could be the top streamer of the week, of the season.
Oh, my gosh. He could be one of the top QBs in fantasy for the week. He has been on a tear. He's cleared 25 fantasy points in back-to-back games. He's gone over 375 passing yards in back-to-back games. And that, my friend, is what happens when a defense changes over and the offense adds 2 complementary stars. Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams are combining for a 60% target share, 50% in the red zone, and 67% in the end zone. It has been a scoring bonanza in Los Angeles, and Matthew Stafford is benefiting. He is now coming off of this biting loss against the 49ers, but is likely to rebound in a big way against this decimated Ravens defense. Baltimore has allowed the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. In fact, 3 different QBs have gone for 27 or more fantasy points. Those 3 QBs, by the way, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and CJ Stroud.
Ooh.
It has been a bloodbath in Baltimore, but I think it'll be a great spot for Stafford to continue to roll in fantasy and bounce back for his squad in real life. I think he has QB5 potential in week 6.
Ooh, I like that a lot. I mean, what I don't like is the team that he's playing as running back, which is Derrick Henry. You mentioned him playing the Ravens. Derrick Henry, not great the last few weeks.
He has been such a disappointment. Now, we know that when we draft Derrick Henry, that his role as a pass catcher has always been limited. He's actually only gone over 20 catches in a season. That's 20 catches in an entire season, twice over his entire 10-year career. So if you think about that, it makes sense then that his numbers are huge when the Ravens are leading and not so huge when the team is trailing. It's just that for most of 2024, they were winning. And unfortunately, for most of 2025, they have not been. Since Henry has been with the Ravens, in wins, he has managed over 20 fantasy points per game. And in losses, he has averaged fewer than 14 fantasy points per game. Again, not a surprise when you look at the team's record thus far into 2025 to know and understand that he's had fewer than 11 fantasy points in 4 straight games, 3 of them being losses. I don't think that changes this week against the aforementioned Rams because the Ravens are 7.5-point underdogs. The Rams are also allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. And in fact, Los Angeles has yet to allow a rushing touchdown to a running back yet this season. So, I don't really like the odds of a bounce back for Henry in week 6, but I do want to roll in a little bit of optimism because he might be a buy low target right now. The Ravens go on bye in week 7, and assuming Lamar Jackson comes back in week 8, the offense could improve and lift, and those winning numbers could return to Henry, and he could rumble his way to a rebound over the back half of the season. So in the spirit of shaking things up, I just want to maybe put out there that if you are needing to do that, buying low on Henry for the back half of the season might be an option.
I like the sound of that because I roster Henry in pretty much every league I'm in, and no one's going to be able to convince me to trade Henry away. I have too much hope that once Lamar's back that he can bounce back. And speaking of bouncing back from retirement is one Mr. Darren Waller. Holy moly, Liz, what has he been eating?
I mean, clearly his Wheaties, because the post-retirement comeback campaign roared on in week 5. Waller scored his 3rd touchdown in 2 games this past Sunday. It was awesome because we were all wondering what was going to happen with Tyreek Hill out of the lineup, and well, Waller's 5 catches trailed only Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane, who both recorded 6 grabs apiece. Also, Waller's 78 yards only trailed Jalen Waddle's. So it does seem as though Darren Waller will be the 3rd option in the Dolphins' offense. I will say it was a bit concerning that his 18.8 fantasy points, what a gorgeous number for a tight end in 2025, by the way. So it was concerning that 18.8 fantasy points last week came in the first 20 minutes of the game. But I still like his appeal down the stretch, particularly after what we saw Jonnu Smith do in 2024, and again, knowing that Hill will be out of the lineup for the rest of the season. In terms of week 6, the matchup does stiffen here because the Chargers have only allowed 4 receiving scores so far this season, though it is worth mentioning that 2 of those touchdowns went to the tight end position. Travis Kelce managed one in week 1, and Theo Johnson scored against Los Angeles in week 4. We also know, if we're speaking about defenses, that the Dolphins defense is going to keep Tua throwing the ball. Dolphins are also 4.5-point underdogs, so again, chasing points is going to be a thing. Waller figures to remain involved. And since we are talking about trading, not to throw cold water on the situation, but maybe you added Waller just because. If you look at his injury history and you need to sell high to fill other portions of your roster, I do think that Waller might get you some great options at this point. And that's only if you are comfortable streaming at the tight end position. And again, you need to shake it up because your record demands that you do.
One might say you have to shake it up.
Are you trying to make a Taylor Swift reference right now?
No, that's the whole thing of the article is shaking things up, Liz. You wrote it.
That's the whole thing of this episode. What are you talking about? Now we're going to talk about a guy who, only caught 30 balls in all of 2024 and drew just 9 looks over the first 4 weeks of the season. But you know what?
Daddy, I love him!
A.J. Barner is fast becoming an integral part of the Seahawks offense. He has dominated as an inline blocker, recording a snap share of 79%. That's not all, though. He also ranks 3rd on the team in routes run behind only Jackson Smith-Njigba and Cooper Kupp, and well ahead of number 3 receiver Torrey Horton. This past weekend, I personally think Barner broke out. He converted all 7 of his looks for 53 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. His 4 total scores on the season is currently tied for first at the position with Dallas Goedert and ranks 5th in the NFL behind Amon-Ra St. Brown, George Pickens, Rome Odunze, and Emeka Egbuka. I expect him to stay involved in what's projected to be a close game with a spread of just 1.5 points this Sunday at Jacksonville. Not for nothing, the Jaguars have allowed touchdowns to the position in back-to-back weeks. So if you are looking for a stream, Barner is currently available in nearly 95% of ESPN fantasy leagues. Joining us today is Marcas Grant, one of the sharpest minds in the fantasy space. You probably know him from NFL Network's NFL Fantasy Live, where he breaks down matchups, trends, and hidden gems every week. We are so thrilled to have him bring his unique voice to Facts versus Feelings. Marcas, welcome to the show.
Appreciate the invitation. It's good to see you, Liz.
We do a segment here on Facts versus Feelings called Fantasy Therapy, and it is a safe space for everybody to ask their fantasy football questions. And given that you also have a question and answer segment on your show, we thought it would be a great experience for our listeners to have us both get comfy on the couch with our listeners and answer some questions. Are you game?
Let's do it.
This is a safe place. It's a place where we can feel free sharing our feelings.
Okay, let's start. I'm going to have producer Presley tell us who we have in terms of voicemails or social questions.
Hey, what's going on? We have a couple voicemails, a couple social questions. Thanks for everybody for submitting. Make sure you do it every week. First person is Christina from Portland. She is fired up after what she saw on Sunday Night Football.
Hi, Liz. It's Christina from Portland, Maine. After what we saw on Sunday Night Football, where do you see Stefon Diggs moving forward? Thanks so much.
Well, I'll say this. It feels like Stefon Diggs is sort of finally finding his inner self now that he's moved to a new space there in New England. And, sometimes when we find ourselves in new situations, we're uncertain, but eventually something happens that, kind of brings you back to your comfort level. And I think in this case, for Stefon Diggs, it was a little bit of seeing his ex, I guess, for lack of a better term, right? I mean, things ended badly between the Bills and Stefon Diggs, and he wanted out of the relationship, and but sometimes you want to make sure you win the breakup. And I think when you have a support system around you like he does with Drake May and Josh McDaniels in that offense there in New England, you start to bring out your great self again. And so I think we're going to see Stefon Diggs look more like his former self, like the more confident, productive self we saw all those years in both Buffalo and Minnesota. So look, I'm very, very proud of him. I'm very excited about what's to come. I think he's going to turn the page and continue this new chapter with some success.
I agree that the revenge factor was very real for Diggs and his subsequent production in Week 5, but it's also worth mentioning that he managed triple-digit receiving yards the prior week in a blowout against the Panthers. So there were hints of this coming upness again in Week 4. I agree with you that I think he is back, more or less, as much as back as he can be given his age right now. I expect him to cruise to, top 20-ish fantasy receiver numbers, particularly over the next 2 weeks where he has exploitable matchups against the Saints and the Titans. So I think we're on the same page here.
Absolutely. And I think another part of this, too, is that they decided to use him more as a downfield threat. The first few weeks had an average depth of target of less than 7 yards. Meanwhile, the last 2 weeks, that number's been above 10. So it's not just dink and dunk with Stefon Diggs and hopefully he can find running room. It's let's see if we can pick up some chunk plays with a guy we know can be productive. And he's going to transform what, for me, has been maybe the worst wide receiver room in the league over the last 2 years. Now it looks like there's a little bit of meat there for the Patriots.
And he's got Drake May. Nobody doesn't like a younger model.
100%. Absolutely. Trade him in. Right?
Dave, speaking of younger models, do you have another voicemail?
I mean, we knew Stefon Diggs was back when he gave Josh Allen that side eye. I need more Stefon Diggs side eye. The second question comes from Matt from Pittsburgh. He might be having some second thoughts on a trade that he made.
Hi, Liz. It's Matt from Pittsburgh. Can you grade this trade for me? I traded Christian McCaffrey for Josh Jacobs. Do you think this was a mistake? Thanks. Bye.
Well, I know sometimes, Liz, we kind of get a little bit of buyer's remorse or seller's remorse, I guess, as the case may be here. But I think when you stop and breathe and think rationally, you'll realize that, I don't know that you gave up as much as you think you did. Yes, you're not going to get the same level of pass catching production out of Josh Jacobs as you will Christian McCaffrey. But what Jacobs brings is, his fantasy love language is a little bit different, right? It's more of, we're going to run the football, we're going to pound the rock, especially near the goal line. And yeah, sure, we'll get you some catches. It's not going to be as much as McCaffrey, but there's a little bit of that contributing in Josh Jacobs as well. So I understand you're moving on to something different. You're a little bit concerned about, can this person bring me the same thing that the other person was? But understand that, everybody is different, and what they bring to the table is going to be different. And understanding that Josh Jacobs can certainly fulfill your fantasy needs in a different way, but I think in the end, you'll be just as happy with Jacobs as you will McCaffrey.
I think you're being very kind here, Marcus, if I'm being honest. I mean, what a wonderful, if I were to have a therapist, I suppose I would like them to say nice things like this to me all the time. I'm going to suppose as well that Matt made this trade because he's nervous about CMC's health given the massive workload that he has been handling. That's my hypothesis. And I think it's a little bit problematic because, obviously we hope that the 49ers get healthier and then McCaffrey's workload will shift, probably less in terms of pass catching and more rushing, though obviously he remains the engine of the 49ers offense. Still, it's important when we look at Josh Jacobs in particular and the fact that he is coming off of a 300-plus carry season, which has negatively affected his efficiency. He was averaging 4.4 yards per carry in 2024. That number is down to 3.3 carries. 3.3 yards per carry thus far into 2025. I don't think you're going to get the efficiency of Josh Jacobs, who is also dealing with a monster workload. I completely respect and understand wanting to shake things up, which is the theme of this week's episode, and getting carried away in a moment. But I also love the fact that CMC might be, a sell high candidate. And yet, I don't think this trade went well. I wish you would have packaged him for another pick if it were a keeper or dynasty format or maybe another ancillary player. I think now, Matt, while awesome, I'm glad you did something. Maybe we have an extra therapy session where we figure out our next steps.
Well, I will say this, and I will say this partially as a 49er fan and not just a fantasy analyst too. Watching this team, they cannot run the football. They are struggling to run the football. They, I believe, are still the only team that does not have a rushing touchdown yet this year. And, the efficiency, the yards per carry are down significantly. And especially in short yardage, goal line, gotta have it situations, they cannot move the ball on the ground. It sort of worked out for McCaffrey because he ends up getting extra targets. That's how he scored his touchdowns this year. But I don't see an immediate answer to that problem for Kyle Shanahan. I think the other part of this is they do like Brian Robinson, and he is getting opportunities there. Obviously, nobody's going to mistake Brian Robinson for Christian McCaffrey. He's not coming for CMC's job, but he is starting to get some opportunities. And so I do think the benefit for Josh Jacobs is he's sort of the guy. I'm not worried about Emmanuel Wilson or anybody else there in that Green Bay backfield.
Marshawn Lloyd can't stay healthy, sure.
I want Marshawn Lloyd to be a thing. Look, I'm a USC guy. I want him to be a thing. He just can't stay on the field. So right now, this is Josh Jacobs' job. And so, yeah, maybe his ceiling isn't quite as high, but I think the floor can be similar. And I just think that he's going to continue to get opportunities on the ground, get those goal line carries. So, CMCs probably have a higher ceiling, but I don't think this trade is as far off maybe as we want to believe at first glance.
So Marcus and I are a little bit split. I think, Matt, if you are working on your feelings, you should probably listen to Marcus, and I will stay silent about some facts. Dave, what do we have next?
Next up, we got a few social questions. This one comes from Reese.tj, or maybe TJ Reese. Which Chargers running back is the better backup after the Hampton injury?
Girl.
Can I say neither?
You can.
Okay, then that's what I'm going to do. And I say this as somebody who tried to be a Kamani Vidal stan previously, and it became apparent very quickly that the Chargers didn't believe in him enough to give him more opportunities. Now, some of that was Last year, J.K. Dobbins had his resurrection that I don't think any of us really saw coming. But even still, I mean, they still would rather have given the ball to Gus Edwards than Kamani Vidal. So I think he's sort of the next man up, but that's just proximity. I mean, he's just kind of the guy standing there. He's the next guy on the depth chart without Omari and Hampton. So I think he kind of gets first crack at it. But, I think we'll see some Hassan Haskins. We'll see them try some other options. In the end, I don't really love either. And look, this is maybe a hot take. I would be terribly surprised if Justin Herbert is their leading rusher over the next couple of weeks.
I think I am in complete agreement with you. The answer is neither, perhaps both, a timeshare. There is a world in which Gus Edwards gets called up off of the couch back to Los Angeles for this gig. There are rumors that Alvin Kamara could be a trade target for the Chargers. We don't know. Nobody is going to see the amount of touches that Omari and Hampton, who was drafted where he was for a reason, is going to see. You mentioned Kamani Vidal. He obviously is one of the names that people are throwing around, Hassan Haskins being the other. I mean, if you look at experience and draft pedigree and the fact that Haskins played under Harbaugh at Michigan, there's an argument there. You made the argument for Vidal. The point is that this is going to be a timeshare, and frankly, I'd rather stay away from the situation if I could than try to find, there is no copy and paste answer to replace Hampton. So you're going to have to do something else. And not for nothing, if you are trying to add depth, if that isn't your issue, if you weren't a Hampton investor who's trying to replace him, then Brian Robinson, who you just mentioned, Tyler Algier, Ray Davis, they are just an injury away from having massive value, as we've seen with Jordan Mason in Minnesota. So if you're looking for depth, maybe go a place that no one else is looking right now instead of the place that everybody is trying to find an answer that is frankly unknowable at the moment.
And I think that's sort of key. And I think we always fall into the trap of, a guy gets hurt and we immediately look for who's behind him on the depth chart as the replacement, where sometimes you are better off looking outside of that roster for help. And I think mentioning Robinson, Tyler Algier is the guy who, depending on your format, might even have standalone value just because he's got 3 games with double-digit carries. He's got a couple of touchdowns, has more rushing yards than Ramondre Stevenson. So the answer's not always on that roster, the roster of the injured players. Sometimes you got to be willing to look outside.
Dave, what's up next?
I mean, I'm loving the Tyler Algier take. I have to have been rostering him as my RB1 after losing a couple running backs. So more touchdowns to him, please. Jim Rush is next. He's asking, is Waddle a solid wide receiver 2 start?
Wait, I just love that a guy named Jim Rush asked a wide receiver question.
Right?
Marcus, you can take this one.
Well, look, his name is Rush, so he's got all the running stuff handled. He needs help elsewhere. I think he is now. Again, this is one of those cases where Tyreek Hill goes down to the next man up. Granted, you're not going to find Jalen Waddle on any waiver wires, but he is the guy who sort of steps into that role, understanding it's going to look a little bit different because this was a Dolphins team that wanted to be more of a vertical passing offense. That didn't really happen, but when they did it, it was more with Tyreek Hill than it was with Jalen Waddle. So I think you're going to see a lot more short, intermediate throws to Waddle, but he gets a few extra targets without Tyreek Hill. I think he's a solid wide receiver too. Side note to all of this, I was originally skeptical about the whole Darren Waller resurgence, but I'm starting to believe this could be a thing with no Tyreek Hill. I actually go back and watching them. I think it could have been a thing even with Tyreek Hill, but especially without. But to answer your question, yeah, I think Jalen Waddle becomes a solid wide receiver too rest of the season.
I completely agree. I actually think he has low-end wide receiver 1 potential in week 6. I mean, we don't have a lot of data to examine what Waddle has done without Hill on the field, though, we do have to remember that before Hill even landed in Miami, Waddle posted one of the best years of his career. He logged 104 catches. He cleared 1,000 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns in his rookie effort, no less. There was one game that Tyreek Hill missed since coming to the Dolphins. It was week 15 of 2023 versus the Jets. And in that game, Waddle converted 8 of 9 balls for 142 yards and a receiving touchdown. He cleared 28 fantasy points in that effort. It's interesting, too, that the 9 targets, I mean, again, this might just be circumstantial or a coincidence because we don't have a plethora of numbers to draw from. But in week 5, he also saw 9 looks without Tyreek. That's a nice amount of volume, even when you're dealing with a quarterback as limited as Tua, who can no longer or maybe could never, depending on which side of the fence you want to lean, push the ball downfield as one wanted. But Waddle does have the speed and yak ability and is a threat with the ball in his hands to add extra yards after the catch. So I like him as like a wide receiver 10 to 12 in week 6, and even versus the Chargers. It doesn't hurt that the Dolphins are 4.5-point underdogs, so we know that Dolphins defense is also going to keep Tua throwing the ball. And I think Waddle, if you got him or you invested in the value at the top of the season, you were probably really happy right now.
Absolutely. You're feeling a lot better than you were before, because I always felt like there were times when the Dolphins forgot that Jalen Waddle was on the roster. But now, again, out of necessity, they are going to have to use him pretty heavily.
They were reminded. All right, Dave, final question for Fantasy Therapy, please.
Final social question. You might need some therapy after this one, Liz. Charles TC asks, can we meet for coffee?
Like virtually? Or like IRL?
Right.
What are we doing?
I mean, is Marcus the chaperone for this presumed
He might need to
date?
be. He might need to
I
be.
think so. Okay, well, I do appreciate, by the way, that is more gentlemanly than asking me for a martini or a cocktail straight away. But yes, you know what? Marcus and I will look at our schedules and see when we are both available for said coffee date in the broad daylight.
Fair enough.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us for Fantasy Therapy. Let's move along. I want to play a game with you because you're just so loose, and I know that you're a big MCU fan, so I wanted to do a whole Avengers kind of game with you. Are you down to play?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I've prepared this game called Avengers Level Threat. I'm going to throw out names of different Marvel villains with a description, and you'll have to give a player comp for each one. Okay, so let's start with Thanos. I want to know who your Thanos for the 2025 season is. Who is the player that you think has and will continue to dominate every week?
I'm going to say it's Puka Nacua, because much like Thanos, he is inevitable. I mean, we're talking about a guy
that's good, Marcus. That was good.
Who leads the NFL in targets, in receptions, in receiving yards. I mean, from a fantasy perspective, he is the top overall scorer, not just the top wide receiver, the top overall scorer in fantasy through the first 5 weeks of the season. In an offense that is throwing the ball way more than we anticipated. I mean, I was looking at the Rams throwing the ball about 60% of the time. Generally speaking, for Sean McVay, that number is closer to about 55%. It's Puka that's dominating those opportunities, and I think especially this week, I think against the Ravens, and that look. They've already had the finger snap and have had their defense sort of vanished away in the first place. But I think Puka and the Rams sort of rampage in Baltimore this week.
Yeah, they are missing all the Infinity Stones in Baltimore at the moment for sure.
All of them.
All of them. I want to move on to Loki. He's one of my favorites, a villain turned anti-hero turned hero. So who is a player that you've found disappointing so far but might be a late season hero?
I'm going to go with, there's a couple guys I can go with, but I'm going to go with A.J. Brown, especially because sort of like Loki, he's got riddles, I mean, he's out here posting cryptic things on social media. I go back to the old Denny Carter line of the enemy speaks kindly and holds a knife. That's kind of where A.J. Brown is, but over the long term, if the Eagles are going to be successful, especially offensively, and if they are going to make a run at repeating, they are going to have to get their wide receivers, specifically A.J. Brown, involved. And we saw a little bit of it last week. We saw Devontae Smith have the big game. But A.J. Brown, when he is right and when he is getting targets, can be a house wrecker. He can be that guy. And we saw it against the Rams earlier this year, right? The Eagles were down at half. They started loading up A.J. Brown with targets, with deep targets down the field. He was forcing missed tackles. He was getting yards after the catch. He really turned into that guy. And so right now, yeah, he's sort of in his villain arc, right? If you drafted A.J. Brown, if you spent a late first, early second round pick on him, you are not happy with the way things are going. But I don't think the Eagles can continue to win consistently without getting A.J. Brown involved. So eventually it's going to turn, and you're going to see him sort of, whether reluctantly or not, teaming up with the rest of the Avengers.
Definitely a boomer bust character for much of the season. I do think in week 6, coming off of that upset against the Broncos, he's going to get the squeaky wheel treatment. So I would expect a rebound, at least for the moment. But I love that answer. Let's roll with Norman Osborn, a.k.a. the Daddy Green Goblin, who is a player that has had multiple personalities, or in fantasy terms, been boomer bust this season.
I think my first inclination on this is probably Daniel Jones.
Okay.
Daniel Jones, who, because look, when Norman Osborn began, he had the best of intentions, right? I mean, he really, I'm something of a scientist myself, right? I mean, he's out here trying to help the world, trying to make things better. And so that was Daniel Jones. He comes out and we're like, hey, man, this guy's doing things. He's producing. But, at some point we also have seen this Daniel Jones movie. And there's going to be a point where he disappoints you. He breaks your heart. He comes back with a villain-type performance. You're excited about Daniel Jones. The matchup looks good. And then he gets you 11 points. But I think with what you see around him, there will be better performances, right? Jonathan Taylor has been amazing to start the season. He's got maybe the best offensive line he's played with in his career there in Indianapolis. And on top of it, we knew Michael Pittman was going to be a big playmaker. Tyler Warren, I think we had expectations for, but he's been phenomenal through the first 5 weeks of the season. So look, at some point, Daniel Jones is Daniel Jones. Norman Osborn is Norman Osborn. And there are going to be moments when that goblin mask is just whispering in his ear, and you're going to see Daniel Jones make some weird throw, and you're like, what the hell are you doing? But, I think in the end, we're going to be sort of overall pleased with it. I think the other part of this, Liz, is if you drafted Daniel Jones, you didn't do it with the intent of him being your lock-solid QB1 every week. Yes. So if you could sort of avoid some of those goblin weeks, I think you're going to be really happy with the output.
I love the idea of Jonathan Taylor as Peter Parker to Daniel Jones as Green Goblin. That is a wonderful picture you're painting. That is a wonderful picture you're painting in Indianapolis. Okay, next, I love Kingpin because he is one of the most strategic Avenger villains. So who is a player that has maximized their opportunities in a gorgeously strategic way this season?
Ooh, I'm going to go down to Tampa, and it goes back and forth. I'm going to go with Baker Mayfield maybe as Kingpin, right? Because, this is a guy who you talk about being strategic and working with what he has around him. We saw what he did the past couple of years with Mike Evans, with a healthy Chris Godwin. Now he's doing it with Emeka Egbuka. They're still sort of waiting, I think, for Godwin to kind of get his legs back underneath him. They will at some point get Mike Evans back. But part of the beauty of Kingpin, not only just his own brute strength, but his ability to manipulate people around him, right? I mean, this is a guy who has, who was the mayor of New York City by, not using just straight up brute strength, but sort of being able to bend other people to his will. And I think Baker Mayfield has done that. And I mean, you go back through his career, this is a guy who I think went every year for a while with having a new offensive coordinator and still found ways to be successful. I think he's still doing that with the different pieces coming in and out. And I think this week especially, on paper, it might be a tough matchup against San Francisco. But the fact is, one way or another, whether it is throwing the football, whether it is those tough scrambles, Baker Mayfield is sort of bending defenses to his will. And, maybe he's obviously not as large as Wilson Fisk, but he still finds a way to exert his influence over the game, regardless of who it is.
You have nailed this game brilliantly and beautifully. Thank you so much, Marcus, for playing along. Before we go, give me your favorite start for week 6 and your most confident sit for week 6.
My favorite start, and I talked about Puka Nacua, but it's going to be Matthew Stafford this week. I mentioned the Rams throwing the ball a ton. Stafford right now averaging 300 passing yards per game. If he were to extrapolate this over a 17-game season, he'd have a career high 5,100 yards is where he would be. Now, I don't think we're going to hit that number for him, but I think this week I would expect the Rams, especially coming off that surprising loss at home to a beat-up 49ers team. They go on the road to an equally or more beat-up Baltimore team. I think you're going to see them throw the ball early and often. Look, I say if you have a Rams, start him right now against this Ravens defense, but I especially think Matthew Stafford. I know, look at that. I'm just all over the place. I especially think Matthew Stafford's going to have a big week. In fact, my bold prediction for the week is Stafford drops a 30-piece on the Ravens coming up this week. My sit, similarly in that game, it might be Derrick Henry, and I know that feels bold because of where you drafted him. But it's 4 straight games with 50 or fewer rushing yards for Derrick Henry. All signs point to Lamar Jackson not being available. And so I don't have a lot of faith in Cooper Rush to be able to stay with the Rams offense in terms of points on the board. And what we have seen the last couple weeks, especially when the Ravens get down, it's been a lot of Justice Hill. He's getting a lot of those snaps. He's the guy that they use in those 2-minute drills, in those hurry-up offenses. He's the pass catcher in this offense. So I think we're going to see a lot of what we saw last week with the Ravens. The Rams jump out to a lead. Baltimore has to sort of scrap its original plans, which means we see less of Derrick Henry and more of Justice Hill. So I know it's kind of a scary thing, but I think we're at that point where we're not just relying on guys because of name value. You have to look at the situation around him. And to be honest, the situation with Baltimore is pretty bleak.
I mean, Marcus, I'm sitting here shaking my head and smiling huge because I opened the show talking about Matt Stafford and Derrick Henry. So thank you for confirming my own analysis, both for myself and for our viewers. You are wonderful, and we are aligned as ever and as always. Can you please tell everyone where they can find your work?
Absolutely. I'm on Blue Sky at Marcus G, Marcasg, but you can find me on the TVs at NFL Network on NFL Fantasy Live. It airs Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And in case that's not enough, I also host a Sirius XM show Saturday mornings from 10 to noon on the Fantasy Sports Radio channel.
Thank you so much, Marcus, for joining us. Adore you. Let's grab that coffee or maybe a beer pretty soon.
Absolutely. Go Dodgers. Go Cubs. Go.
Last call.
Today we learned that secret handshakes are one of life's greatest pleasures. That Loki is low-key, the MCU's best villain, and that sometimes making a pivot provides a necessary reset because it makes room for something new, like a set of circumstances we hadn't yet even considered. While that doesn't necessarily guarantee us victory, it does increase the odds of our enjoyment. Big thanks to Marcas Grant for joining the show and playing along, and as always to producer Dave for knowing when to hit that disclaimer button. Be sure to check out my Week 6 edition of the Facts vs. Feelings column, which is currently live on the .com. And remember, you can leave us a voicemail. Hit us up at 914-348-1893. Until next time, may your facts be solid, your feelings be right, and your bus be someone else's problem. Big mommy clap. We are bringing more fantasy, more facts, and of course, well, I forgot feelings.
Okay, big mama clap.
Mommy. I didn't say mama. That's weird. Oh, daddy. Somebody just spanked something back there.